Welcome, dearly beloved anointed ones. When you live so clean that even an investigation turns into a fan club meeting, you know your enemies are screwed. Let's start with this chilling fact. Over 65% of personal character attacks are fueled by private envy, not public evidence. And in your case, chosen one, they sent someone to dig up dirt on you, and the shovel snapped in half. They tried to build a case. They were ready for the downfall. They had the popcorn, the fake tears, the screenshot folder. But when the investigator did what investigators do, talked to real people who actually knew you, he didn't find secrets. He found supporters. Not skeletons in the closet, just well-folded clothes and receipts of integrity. Imagine their faces when they heard, "Oh yeah, they're actually one of the most consistent and respectful people I've ever worked with. Never gave drama, always focused, rare breed." Plot twist, they sent someone to destroy your name. Instead, they accidentally upgraded your reputation. What you're about to hear is how this entire spiritual surveillance mission backfired so hard it lit their whole scheme on fire. So buckle up, because this isn't just gossip, this is divine evidence that your light walks into rooms even when you're not there. And for those who tried to sabotage you, let's just say they tried to assassinate your character and ended up testifying on your behalf. Let's break it all the way down. Number one, they were praying for dirt, but you were soil-free. They were hoping to dig up something dirty about you, anything that could smear your name and confirm the rumors they secretly spread behind your back. This wasn't just curiosity, it was a setup. A character assassination mission masked as concern or background checking. They wanted to find something they could weaponize against you. Old drama, shady behavior, a crack in your consistency. But what they didn't count on was that you've actually lived the life you said you lived. You weren't out here pretending to be pure while moving wild behind closed doors. You didn't just survive storms, you stayed clean in them. The people they questioned were supposed to expose you. That was the whole plan. But instead, those same people spoke well of you, not because they were trying to defend you, but because your life had already done the talking. You've been the same person in public and in private. You've been real, respectful, and grounded, even when nobody was looking. That's what made them mad. Because you were supposed to give them something to work with, a flaw, a scandal, a questionable text, a shady deal. But when the investigator went out asking, all he found was consistency. That burned them more than anything, because they've been spinning this silent narrative that you're not as good as you appear, that there's something off about you. But when the truth walked into the room, it collapsed their fiction in seconds. People who knew you, even from a distance, couldn't co-sign the nonsense. All they could say was, nope, they've always been solid. They were looking for dirt, but there was none. Just soil you grew in. That's why they're angry. Not because someone lied for you, but because no one had to. The good gossip wasn't manufactured, it was earned. You didn't clean up for the investigation, you were already living right. That's the kind of truth that makes enemies uncomfortable, because it means the one thing they were counting on, your downfall, was never real to begin with. Now they're sitting in the discomfort of knowing that their entire plan hinged on the hope that you were faking it, and you weren't. That's not just frustrating to them, that's devastating. Number two, the streets spoke louder than their secrets. They thought the streets would echo their lies. They assumed the rumors they started in private had spread far enough to stain your name in public. But when someone neutral, a real investigator, started asking around, it didn't go the way they planned. The streets didn't confirm the drama. The streets exposed the truth, because what they forgot is that you've made quiet impact in places they never even looked. You weren't just showing up at work or around friends, you were leaving impressions. Solid ones, real ones, ones that couldn't be undone by gossip. People who've seen you operate, who've watched you carry yourself with grace, humility, and maturity, those people spoke up when it counted. Not because you asked, not because they were trying to defend you, but because real recognizes real. They told the investigator what they knew, that you weren't messy, you weren't toxic, you weren't what they'd heard. You were focused, you were respectful, you moved with integrity, even when no one was watching. And suddenly, the whole fake storyline started crumbling. That's when the people who started the lies got mad, not because someone defended you, but because too many people refused to join their fantasy. They were banking on silence or shady echoes, but what they got was a wall of truth they couldn't climb. The streets didn't just fail to confirm their lies. They did the opposite. They testified. And when that kind of unfiltered, unplanned truth starts rolling in, it hits harder than any speech you could have made. You've got people out here who barely even interact with you but still had good things to say. That's the kind of impact you make. Not loud, but lasting. The same places they tried to bury your name are now the ones praising your character. That's spiritual justice in action. And now they're furious. Not just because they lost control, but because their lies have been overshadowed by truth they can't erase. They underestimated your influence in the everyday. They thought gossip would speak louder than your legacy, but the streets told the real story, and it left them exposed with nothing to stand on but their bitterness. Number 3, even the quiet witnesses had nothing ugly to say. Some people assumed that your silence meant you had something to hide. They thought if someone looked deep enough, asked the right people, or pressured the quiet ones, the truth would finally come out, and that truth would be ugly. But what they didn't expect was that even the people who didn't necessarily like you had nothing bad to say. That's how rare your energy is. Even the ones who never vibed with you couldn't deny the fact that you never gave them a real reason to speak foul. The quiet coworker who kept to themselves, the classmate you barely spoke to, the ex-friend who drifted away, not on bad terms, but not on great ones either. These were the people they were hoping would spill something, anything. But when the questions came, none of them could say you were reckless. None of them could say you were shady. The most they could say was, they stayed to themselves, or we didn't talk much, but they were always respectful. And that's what shook them, because when even the people who aren't on your side can't co-sign a lie, that's not luck. That's consistency. You've been so rooted in your truth, so disciplined in your character, that even the people who don't rock with you won't lie on you. That's the type of reputation you can't fake, and you can't fast track. You have to live it every single day, when nobody's watching, when nobody's clapping, when nobody's giving you the benefit of the doubt. The people who tried to smear your name thought they had backup. They thought once the investigator reached out, there'd be whispers and side comments to support the slander, but they were left disappointed. Nobody backed it up because the reality is you're not perfect, but you've been honest, you've been respectful, and you've kept your lane clean. That left them with nothing to twist. What really enraged them was how even the people they thought would help their case ended up silently proving yours. They weren't ready for that. They weren't prepared for neutrality to lean in your favor. And now they're angry, not because you defended yourself, but because you never had to. The truth stood up for you without saying a word. Number 4, their rage isn't about the report, it's about the mirror. They thought this investigation was going to shine a light on you. What they didn't expect was that the same light would expose them. When the investigator went digging for dirt, all they kept finding was confirmation of your growth, your integrity, your consistency. And with every good word spoken about you, something deep inside them cracked. Because the truth wasn't just clearing your name, it was confronting theirs. What made them furious wasn't just that the report came back clean, it was that you came back clean. No slip-ups, no messy past, no trail of destruction behind you. They were hoping that if someone really looked, they'd find a version of you that matched the one they'd created in their heads, the bitter, fake, problematic version they'd projected onto you. But what the investigation actually revealed was how little of that was real and how much of it was just their own reflection. You became a mirror. Every compliment about your character reminded them of the traits they've refused to develop. Every story of how you handled pressure, how you stayed quiet through chaos, how you stayed respectful even when provoked, it all exposed the parts of them they've been hiding or ignoring. That's what really made them angry. It wasn't about justice or truth, it was about ego. The more others saw your light, the more they had to sit in the dark with their own choices. They weren't ready for that kind of exposure. They weren't prepared for the investigation to double back on them. But that's what happens when your life is lived in truth. It starts to reveal everything around it. They called for an audit, and it turned into a reflection. And now they're not just mad at you, they're uncomfortable with themselves. Because it's hard to keep pretending when the person you tried to drag is standing clean and you're the only one covered in dirt. You didn't just survive the setup, you showed them what accountability looks like without saying a word, and the mirror didn't lie. Number 5, they didn't just lose control, they lost the narrative. They were so sure they had you cornered, not physically, but socially, mentally, emotionally. They didn't need to fight you directly, they just needed to control the way people perceived you. That was the real weapon. They whispered half-truths in the right ears, they exaggerated your silence, they misinterpreted your peace, they created drama and then acted like you were the cause of it. It wasn't about facts, it was about narrative. And they were banking on the idea that no one would question it. What they didn't anticipate was that when someone finally decided to check the source, the whole script fell apart. The people they didn't expect to speak up, the co-workers, the friends, the acquaintances, even the ones who barely knew you, they all told a version of the same truth. You're not what they said you were. And in that moment, the power shifted. The lie lost its legs. The smear campaign unraveled because it couldn't stand next to real-life proof of your character. That's when things got real. They didn't just lose control of the situation, they lost control of the story. The false image they built of you, brick by brick in private conversations and manipulative posts, came crashing down. And once people saw the truth, they couldn't unsee it. Your quiet strength, your consistent energy, your refusal to engage in petty drama, all of that began to speak louder than their staged performances. Now the people who once sided with them are starting to question everything. Why did they go so hard against someone who's done nothing but mind their business? Why did they try to paint that person as a villain when all I've seen is peace? That kind of doubt is dangerous to someone who relies on manipulation. They thought they were writing your downfall, but they were actually writing their own exposure. They underestimated how loud the truth becomes when it's confirmed by multiple unrelated sources. They lost more than your attention. They lost their credibility, because once the narrative breaks, it's not just a loss, it's a collapse. Number 6, you've been living so authentically, even strangers could vouch. You didn't have to make speeches about who you are. You didn't have to post inspirational quotes to prove you had good intentions. You just lived, day by day, moment by moment. You were respectful to people even when it wasn't required. You stayed away from unnecessary drama. You didn't play the politics or jump into cliques. You didn't over-explain yourself, and you didn't fake a smile to survive. You simply chose to live in alignment with your values. And that kind of quiet consistency left a trail that even strangers could follow. That's what made you dangerous to your enemies. Because when the investigator came around expecting mixed reviews and subtle shade, what he actually found was something rare. Pattern after pattern of people saying they're just solid. People who barely knew you still had good things to say. Not because you were flashy or loud or charming, but because your energy was steady. They couldn't find anyone saying, oh yeah, they were always starting something, or they rubbed me the wrong way. Even the people who only saw you in passing said the same thing. Calm, respectful, keeps to themselves. That's when the ones trying to sabotage you started to panic. They were counting on bias, misunderstanding, or at least someone willing to twist your image. But you didn't leave room for that. You didn't give them any contradictions to work with. Your name carried a frequency that felt the same everywhere. No chaos, no complications, just alignment. It wasn't perfection, it was integrity. And that speaks louder than performance. Even people who didn't know your full story could feel your presence wasn't fake. That's a kind of spiritual signature you can't fabricate. It's either there or it's not. And in your case, it showed up loud and clear in the mouths of people who owed you nothing. So while your enemies were busy scripting a scandal, you were quietly building a legacy of truth. And when it mattered most, even strangers became witnesses. That's when they realized they couldn't beat you. Because how do you destroy someone whose life already defended itself before they even opened their mouth? Number 7, they used to smirk at your solitude until it protected you. They mocked the way you stayed in your own lane. They thought your solitude was weakness. They labeled you cold, standoffish, even arrogant. You didn't hang out in every circle. You didn't participate in fake conversations. You didn't chase acceptance. And for a while they laughed at that. They thought your silence was proof you didn't belong. But now that the tables have turned, that same solitude they clowned has become your greatest protection. While they were forming bonds built on gossip and alliances built on strategy, you were building your life on truth. You weren't moving based on popularity. You were moving with purpose. They had group chats full of shade and fake smiles. You had peace, clarity, and consistency. They moved in packs to validate each other's lies. You walked alone to preserve your integrity. And now, when the investigator shows up and starts asking questions, they realize just how badly they miscalculated. Your solitude didn't make you mysterious. It made you untouchable. You weren't caught up in the drama. You weren't in the middle of the mess. You weren't part of the inner circles where secrets were traded like currency. So now there's nothing to link you to the chaos. Your distance is working like a shield, blocking every attempt they made to connect your name to nonsense. They thought you were disconnected, but you were just discerning. You didn't isolate out of fear. You separated out of wisdom. You knew better than to tie your peace to people who couldn't even manage their own. And now that the storm is here, they're all scrambling to control the narrative, while you're standing still, untouched, with a record that speaks for itself. That's the part that stings the most. They spent all that time trying to drag you into the mud, thinking no one would believe your silence. But now that the truth is coming out, that silence has become the loudest voice in the room. It wasn't antisocial behavior, it was divine protection, and what once looked like distance is now looking like divine strategy. They laughed back then, but no one's laughing now. Number 8, the good gossip was a bulletproof vest in a spiritual war. You didn't even realize it at the time, but the way you carried yourself in private was silently stacking up protection in public. While your enemies were plotting how to twist your image, people were already speaking well of you behind your back, for no reason other than they had seen your character and couldn't deny it. You weren't performing. You weren't out trying to look perfect. You were just being real, being solid, being consistent. And that quiet authenticity turned into something powerful, a spiritual bulletproof vest. Your name started working for you when you weren't in the room. The truth traveled further than the lies ever could. When people asked about you, hoping to uncover something shady, they didn't find dirt. They found evidence. Evidence of how you treat people, how you stay calm when others panic, how you keep your head down and stay away from petty drama. The gossip that came back wasn't malicious, it was honorable. People were saying things like, they've always been respectful. They stay to themselves, never heard them in any mess. And while your enemies were out here preparing a case against you, hoping to assassinate your reputation, they had no idea they were walking into a courtroom where your life had already been testifying for you. Without knowing it, the people who've witnessed your growth, your grace, your quiet strength, they became your witnesses, real ones, solid ones, people who had nothing to gain from defending you but still told the truth. That's why the attacks didn't land. That's why the setup didn't stick, because this wasn't just about image, it was spiritual warfare. They were coming for your identity, your name, your essence. But your track record had already armored you. They didn't know that every honest interaction you had, every time you chose not to respond to hate, every time you stayed grounded while being misunderstood, it all added layers of protection around you. So when it came time to judge your character, it wasn't their lies that spoke, it was your truth. And that truth didn't just show up, it won the case. The verdict was clear, solid, unshaken, covered. Number 9, your boring life was their worst nightmare. They never understood you, so they called you boring. You weren't chasing drama, you weren't all over the place, you weren't trying to be seen or trying to make a scene. You kept to your routine, minded your business, stayed consistent, and protected your peace. And because they couldn't figure you out or stir you up, they convinced themselves you were just plain, unremarkable, forgettable. But now that they needed chaos to tie to your name, now that they were hoping for receipts, mess, or something scandalous, they're realizing that your so-called boring life is the very thing that's saving you. Your discipline has been your secret weapon. You never moved sloppy. You weren't out doing things you'd regret later. You weren't involved in shady dealings, messy friendships, or reckless behavior. You weren't giving them anything to work with. So when the investigator started looking, there was nothing there. No trail of destruction, no hidden texts, no bad blood, just peace, boundaries, and evidence of a person who's been solid for a long time. What they failed to understand is that living a peaceful, grounded life isn't boring, it's powerful, it's strategic, it's protection in disguise. While they were busy performing for attention, you were building a foundation. And now that everything's being looked at closely, their chaos is exposing them, while your stillness is defending you. They underestimated how threatening your stability would become because people like you aren't easy to manipulate. You don't take the bait. You don't get caught up in emotionally charged traps, and that drives unstable people insane. They were counting on a weakness, some reckless moment, some skeleton in the closet. But all they found was a consistent, steady life built with intention. Now they're scrambling, because their entire plan required you to have a past they could weaponize. But your so-called boring life left them with nothing. And that kind of nothing, that's powerful. That's frightening to someone who lives off drama. You didn't just outlast them, you outdisciplined them. And now the very thing they mocked has become the reason they can't touch you. Number 10, they wanted the investigator to confirm the lie. He confirmed the light. They weren't seeking truth. They were seeking confirmation for a lie they had already decided was real. They wanted the investigator to validate the twisted image they built of you in secret, the troublemaker, the manipulator, the one who couldn't possibly be as composed and clear as you appeared to be. Their goal wasn't justice, it was vindication for their bitterness. So they sat back, smug and confident, thinking the investigation would do what their rumors couldn't, damage your name officially. But what they didn't know was that this wasn't just a human setup, it was a spiritual checkmate. This wasn't just about your reputation being tested, this was a moment of divine alignment. The same people they thought would speak against you ended up confirming the light you carry. They didn't even have to lie for you, they just told the truth, your truth. And that was more than enough. When the investigator started collecting information, he didn't find confusion, he found clarity, he found consistency. He found stories of someone who had handled chaos without retaliation, someone who had kept their head down while being attacked, someone who never played dirty even when things got ugly. He found character. And when all the pieces were put together, the truth wasn't muddy. It was sharp and unmistakable. Grace, integrity, light. To them, it felt like betrayal. They were banking on this being your undoing. Instead, it was your unveiling. They expected punishment. What they got was proof. And not just proof that you were innocent, but proof that you were covered, chosen, held. That's what really shook them, because the moment that final report came back, it didn't just clear your name, it exposed their intentions. That was the judgment. Not just that you were found clean, but that they were caught trying to stain what they had no authority to touch. This wasn't just a win for your reputation, it was a spiritual verdict that echoed louder than their lies ever could. They didn't just lose control, they stood exposed under a truth they can't spin or bury. Number 11, they underestimated how deep your roots go. They saw your calmness and mistook it for passiveness. They thought your silence meant you had no backing. They assumed that just because you weren't flashy, loud, or constantly visible, that you didn't have any real weight behind your name. But what they didn't realize is that you weren't standing on surface-level approval. You were rooted in something far deeper. Respect. People may be quick to talk about someone they like, especially if it makes them feel included or entertained. But when it comes to someone they respect, that's a different game entirely. Respect makes people think twice. It makes them hesitate before dragging your name into mess. Because deep down, even the ones who don't rock with you know there's a line they can't cross without exposing themselves. That's what made the whole thing unravel. Your enemies assumed people would be quick to tear you down if they just had an excuse. They were banking on others to add fuel to their fire, but what they ran into instead was resistance. Not everyone they approached was a fan of yours, but they were unwilling to lie on you. They couldn't fake a narrative that didn't match what they've seen. Because even if someone didn't like you personally, they couldn't deny the way you carried yourself, the way you handled pressure, the way you consistently showed up with integrity. Your roots went deeper than their reach. You'd sown seeds in silence, built trust through actions, and created a presence that couldn't be shaken by speculation. And so when the time came to try and twist your image, the soil rejected the lie. People remembered how you treated them, how you stayed level-headed, how you never stooped to petty games. That memory became your defense, and that defense ran deep. They wanted to see you unravel. They didn't expect the community, some silent, some distant, to quietly protect you, because you weren't just cool. You were respected. And in the moments when lies tried to root themselves in your story, That respect acted like a firewall. It blocked the gossip. It killed the momentum. And it reminded your enemies of something they forgot. Real ones don't fall easily. They stand firm, rooted. Number 12. They turned a character check into a courtroom, but you had the receipts. They thought asking around about you would stir up something scandalous. They assumed the more people they questioned, the more likely it was that someone, anyone, would have something negative to say. But they didn't realize they weren't just conducting a character check. They had unknowingly opened a courtroom. And your life? It had already filed the evidence. Every moment you chose peace over retaliation became a receipt. Every time you treated someone with respect, even when they didn't deserve it, another receipt. Every instance you showed up stayed consistent, kept your boundaries, and moved with grace. That was documentation, quiet, unspoken, but powerful. You didn't need a defense team. You were the proof. Your actions, your patterns, your past decisions had already submitted testimony on your behalf. So when the questions started circulating, when people were approached, when your name came up, what they found wasn't drama, but documentation, patterns, repetition, integrity. People started responding with versions of the same thing. They're solid. They don't get involved in nonsense. They don't talk bad about people. And that's when your enemies realized they were no longer in control of the narrative. They hadn't started an investigation. They'd initiated a trial. And the verdict wasn't going the way they hoped. They wanted mess. But your discipline had been loud in silence. You had no reason to scramble, no need to explain yourself, because the work was already done. You'd been consistent when nobody was watching. You were measured even when you were misunderstood. You were gracious even when you had every right to lash out. That's the part they never anticipated. They thought they'd catch you slipping. Instead, they tripped over your stability. They turned the spotlight on you, hoping to catch flaws. But the light just exposed your truth. You didn't need to pull out receipts. They were already there, sitting quietly in the hearts and minds of people who watched how you move. You didn't win by defending yourself. You won because your life had already answered the questions long before they were asked. Number 13. Now they're panicking because their plan relied on your silence. They built their entire strategy on the belief that you would stay quiet forever, that you wouldn't defend yourself, that you wouldn't correct the lies. They mistook your silence for helplessness, when in reality it was discipline, it was wisdom, it was restraint. You weren't being passive, you were being strategic. And now that the truth is out and the investigation is done, they're panicking. Not because you said anything, but because you didn't have to. They were counting on you reacting. They wanted you to lash out, to look unstable, to give them something they could twist. But you gave them nothing. You didn't play their game. You let your character do the talking, and that's what's making them unravel. Because the moment people started speaking truthfully about who you are, everything they built collapsed under the weight of your silence. They told half-truths and spun narratives behind your back, thinking the lies would spread faster than your integrity. But what they didn't count on was that people were paying attention. Your consistency had already made an impression. Your peace had already raised eyebrows. Your avoidance of drama had already left questions. So when the time came for people to speak about you, the truth came out without you lifting a single finger. Now the ones who tried to bury you are the ones looking exposed. They're scrambling to explain themselves, switching up their story, backtracking in conversations they never thought would be revisited. The irony? You never mentioned their names. You never clapped back. You didn't blast them, shame them, or even acknowledge the smear campaign. And yet, they're unraveling in real time. Because there's something deeply unsettling about being exposed by your own actions, while the person you tried to destroy never says a word. That silence hits harder than any confrontation ever could. You didn't need revenge. You didn't need to defend yourself. They revealed who they were while trying to assassinate your character. You stayed quiet, and they handed over the evidence themselves. Now everyone sees it. And the silence they once mocked, that's the same silence that ended up being your power and their undoing. Number 14, you became the plot twist they never saw coming. They had the whole story mapped out. In their minds, you were the problem, the troublemaker, the one who was too quiet, too confident, too different to trust. So they cast you as the villain and spread that version of you in whispers, body language, and carefully curated shade. They thought they were writing your downfall like a predictable plot. But what they didn't realize is that life, and especially divine timing, doesn't follow their script. They expected people to believe them without question. They expected their version of you to stick because they repeated it enough times. But when the real feedback started coming in, when the investigation kicked off and folks were actually asked about who you are, not in gossip circles, but in a way that counted, the entire storyline fell apart. You weren't the villain. You weren't the chaos. You were the one who held it together while they stirred the pot. And suddenly the audience, the people watching, the ones they tried to manipulate, started seeing it clearly. You became the plot twist, not by shouting or defending or explaining, but simply by being consistent, by being you. The truth started surfacing from places they didn't expect. People they assumed would join their drama turned around and told the truth. The narrative flipped, and they couldn't control it anymore. And here's what they really weren't ready for. The investigator wasn't just a professional asking questions. That was a divine interruption, a divine pause sent into the story to prevent a lie from becoming reality. Just when the deception was about to take root, something stepped in to stop it cold, not because you begged for justice, but because justice was already woven into your destiny. You were never meant to be destroyed by their version of you. They thought they were running the story, but the truth is they were just background noise in your plotline. You weren't a twist in their drama. They were the subplot in your breakthrough. And now, the real story is unfolding, and it doesn't end the way they wrote it. They tried to reduce you to a rumor. They tried to rewrite your identity using lies, envy, and twisted narratives. They orchestrated whispers behind your back, hoping they'd echo loud enough to damage your name. But in the end, it wasn't their words that stood. It was your life. Everything they did was built on the hope that no one would look deeper, that people would accept their version of you at face value. But the moment truth was invited into the room, the entire illusion shattered. Not only were you found clean, you were found respected. Not only were you untouched, you were revered. Because this wasn't just a social test, it was a spiritual unveiling. Your silence didn't make you weak, it made you untouchable. Your solitude wasn't isolation, it was insulation. Your so-called boring life wasn't plain, it was proof that you've been moving in discipline, integrity, and divine timing all along. And when the spotlight finally turned your way, it didn't expose scandal, it revealed light. The investigator didn't just ask questions. That moment was ordained. It was divine interruption, a spiritual audit to stop the lie before it metastasized into something destructive. And when the reports came in, truthful, glowing, solid, they didn't just confirm your innocence, they confirmed your calling. Now the ones who schemed against you are dealing with the fallout of their own projections. They were prepared to see you fall, but what they weren't ready for was to see you rise. Without lifting a finger, without throwing dirt back, without saying a word. You didn't win with noise, you won with evidence. And that's the power of living in alignment. Your life doesn't need defending when it's already bearing witness on your behalf. They thought they were writing your ending, but all they did was fast forward your breakthrough. So let this be the message. Your character is your covering, your truth is your testimony, and your silence. That was the strategy that stunned them all. They sent someone to find the worst in you, and instead, the world discovered the best. This message spoke to your spirit. If it confirmed what you already felt in your soul, then don't just sit with it, move with it. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss another word meant to sharpen your discernment and confirm your journey. Drop a comment below. Let me know how this hit you, because your voice matters in this space. Like the video if you felt seen, heard, or understood today. Share this with someone who's been silently fighting battles their character is already winning. They need to know they're not alone. This isn't just content, it's confirmation. This isn't just a video, it's vindication wrapped in truth. And if you know you're walking in purpose, this is the community built for you. Welcome home, stay grounded, stay glowing, stay chosen. God bless you.